Welcome to the Alcomatics CyberSEC Leaders Webinar Series. I'm Rudi, Managing Director of Alcomatics. We are a niche executive search and recruitment firm focused on the IT channel industry based in the UAE. Now, our strategic focus right now is cybersecurity. As a part of our ongoing client and candidate value program, we're running this series in an attempt to give business leaders insight into ways to attract key talent in the industry by discussing career objectives, trends, threats, and solutions with a variety of industry guests. And today, I'm excited to be joined by Rudi Feitsma. Rudi is the General Manager of BIOSME, and these are an award-winning managed service and cloud provider who were established here in 2002, here in the UAE, that is, and they're committed to helping organizations become more efficient and cloud-enabled through in-country, and global cloud networks and platforms. Say hello again, Rudi.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here.
Excellent. Listen, before we get into the main conversation, Rudi, which is obviously predominantly about your experience and your opinion, let's say, I think it's important to note that BIOS is now approaching their 20-year anniversary here in the UAE. So what does that mean for you guys? What are you doing? Are you doing anything to celebrate?
I think absolutely, and quite a big move for the business. So we've expanded regionally. So we've opened up cloud nodes and data centers in Saudi Arabia and this week in Oman. So a really exciting period of time to extend our reach closer to our customers, and that's been driven by demand in those countries and also by demand from existing customers operating there and wanting sort of data management, cloud access locally. So, really pretty exciting.
Excellent. Yeah, I think the fact that being in technology, I guess, as a field in general for 20 years implies you've lived through quite a lot of change as well as a business and an individual, right?
Yeah, totally. I remember, I think I started and fax machines were still considered modern. So life's moved on.
Know what that is, do they?
Yeah, I don't think so. So life's moved on considerably from there. And it has been, quite an exciting sort of thing to be involved in and seeing the difference it really does make to businesses. So there's been a lot along the way.
Cool. So look, let's get into it now in a bit more detail with you specifically. So can you just tell our listeners, obviously I've said already that you're the general manager at BIOSME, but can you just give us or let us know in a little bit more detail what that involves? And can you give us some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it breaks down to two essential things that I'm primarily focused on. And the first is working with customers, and we work with a wide range of customers right across industries, different sizes, and my role is primarily to work with our teams to identify and define what technologies will help them grow and change and improve as businesses. So that's kind of an activity that keeps me in forefront of what's happening in the marketplace and what customers are telling us they need and their challenges are. The second thing as a general manager, what I do is I get involved in service delivery to make sure that BIOS is delivering on the commitments it makes, but that the customers are getting the full value out of what they've chosen and the technologies they've implemented. And again, that gives me a different insight into different sorts of challenges and issues and improvements they want to continue making. So very much, while it's a generalist role, it's very customer facing. And I think that's important for today because what I want to share is not so much what I know, but what customers are telling us and what they're experiencing. And I think there's some organizations that have grasped cybersecurity and are doing really, really well with it. Others are well on the journey and just need some reassurance. Are they going in the right direction or do they need to do something different? And for some, it's still a real challenge. And even scarily, some haven't even gotten involved in it. So I think I can share some experiences across all of those sorts of things.
Definitely. I think something that we were discussing just before we started the session a moment ago, we're talking about the language of cybersecurity as well, right? And I think maybe some companies perhaps haven't started on our journey yet, maybe because they're just overwhelmed by it all. Everyone's got the best product, the best solution, the most fitting bit of software for your organization. So, and I guess as a company looking to benefit from all this, choosing the right provider is a bit of a minefield, isn't it?
Look, we're really guilty as an industry, not just in cybersecurity, but right across telecoms and IT, of making it really quite difficult for customers.
Yeah.
The solutions are complex enough, and the way organizations or vendors and suppliers position them and communicate them really doesn't help customers understand them. So yeah, it's a big challenge for customers breaking through, what is essentially a pretty new topic for everybody. Yeah. And with everything in technology that starts at this point, it is quite technically driven, which makes it even harder for people because not everyone's a specialist. So I think as an industry, as this becomes more mainstream, we need to simplify it to allow people to scale that knowledge transfer much more easily, and therefore have far more meaningful conversations about it, rather than people feeling a bit closed in because of their lack of understanding.
Yeah, I think it's important to make the note that when you say simplify, you don't necessarily mean simplify the products or services that we send, perhaps just simplifying the way we articulate exactly what these things mean for our clients, right?
And they are incredibly complex and sophisticated, but as an end user, we don't all need to know that. We need to understand what it's going to do for you, not necessarily how it does it. There will be people in each organization that should know that and be able to validate it, but we don't need to change the complexity of the solution. We need to change how we communicate what it's going to do for people, and I think that'll make life a lot easier.
Definitely.
That's been the case for 20 odd years. I think that's going to be a slow change, but we'll do our best each meeting at a time.
Definitely. So look, let's discuss then to some extent the last 20 years, I guess, or at least your career. Can you tell us a little bit about your career to date and what's led you to the movement between organizations that you've had and countries as well?
I wish I could admit it was a great plan that I had mapped out years ago, but it's kind of been a series of opportunities that I've just had, the chance to follow, that have been really interesting and exciting, and as you said, covered lots of different territories. So I started in technology really in Australia, where they were just on the cusp of launching mobile phones. So we were still using alphanumeric pages, if there's anyone out there that remembers what those were, but they were great in the day. And it very, very quickly evolved. So, I got involved in the launch of mobile phones in Australia, and there was quite a lot of change in the industry then. And the next big evolution was voice and data converging. And again, I think there's probably people on the call that weren't around when voice and data were two entirely separate networks. So the convergence of those was a whole new wave of things, and I was lucky enough to get involved in that with a number of international companies and doing things internationally around that. Yeah. That kind of gave birth to the internet, which changed everything. And I was in Australia at the time, and Ericsson in Australia was really, really innovative. And they had a couple of maverick DevOps parts of the business that created some really, really interesting but super effective tools for the internet, really in its infancy. And we're almost too far ahead of the game. So they backed it off a bit and created multimedia contact centers, which was again a whole new way of reaching out to customers and dealing with customers. So through my involvement in Ericsson, I went to the States and then the UK to launch what we know today as unified comms and multimedia contact centers. So it opened up, as I said, a whole new way of customer engagement for people purely through technology, which was really good. Mobile data suddenly became the big thing. I remember I was involved with T-Mobile with the launch of Blackberries, which were hugely successful and popular in the day. But it wasn't just about BlackBerry; it was about mobile data. Yeah, and this was really extending mobile and remote working. We didn't call it that in those days, but this was the first of the tools to be able to do it, where on a device you could actually get data when you weren't in the office and weren't connected anywhere but a mobile network. So that was really big. I then had a chance to move into something different, which was going right to the core of IT, which, and by this stage, I'd probably been 20 years into the industry, and I'd hardly ever, in fact, I don't know if I'd ever set foot into a physical data center. So it was really interesting to have an opportunity to start selling data center services and data center space. And, these are the facilities where the physical internet lives. For all of us, the internet's this wonderful virtual thing. But it really is, it's full of physical boxes of networking, computing and storage. and they have to sit somewhere, and they have to sit somewhere purpose-built. So selling data center space was right to the core of where the internet came from and how it interconnected. So that was really interesting, and that very quickly led to cloud. And through cloud and the proliferation of moving data so rapidly, had to have that data protected, and therefore, like any good organization, BIOSME has been heavily involved in cybersecurity early on. So that's kind of how it's all evolved. No great plan. It was just sort of emerging technologies and having experience launching emerging technologies let me move to the next one and the next one. So
it's quite an interesting story, because like you say, your career has essentially not necessarily ridden the wave, but it seems like you've always been on the cusp of change as things have progressed, right? Moving from
really enough to buy a big yacht and retire, but yeah, certainly. I think it's taking it from the early adopter stage into the mass market. So not maybe if you look at the life cycle of things, not maybe at the innovation and straight into early adopter, but at the end of that and into mass market is kind of what allowed me to do some of these things. Yeah,
excellent. So, okay, that brings us, like you say, up to the point today where we're much more involved. Everyone's much more aware of the need for cybersecurity. Should we say it? Certainly because of digital transformation and the role that's playing in every company. But so how can you see, or how have you seen cybersecurity as an industry change over the last 12 to 18 months?
It's a big question. It's been sudden, hasn't it? It's not come out of nowhere, but it's certainly emerged from a specialist area or a specialist field very rapidly into kind of the mass market. So I'll give you an example of that. I was at a sports function recently and a very mixed table, no one associated with technology, and the conversation around two-factor authentication started. So there's a group of consumers talking about cybersecurity, because the way they now access their banking online or do shopping, they have to have two-factor authentication. So they're now aware of cybersecurity and what it means. And I think when you look at some of this, really big cybersecurity incidents over the last couple of years with, the Googles and the Microsofts even, they're getting across. There's a lot of publicity around it. But in terms of an industry perspective, I think it's that shift for me that I've noticed. So it's gone from, innovative businesses and early adopters, where it's very technical and it's very specialist-led. It's now into the mainstream mass market. And it's arrived with quite a thud. So it means organisations are having to adapt very, very quickly. And I think some organisations are better equipped than that, and others are struggling a little bit with it.
One of the phrases used in our conversation report before was, and I guess this feeds into your comment about being adapting, is cybersecurity ready, right?
Yeah, very much. So anything organisations are doing now, and I think we'll probably touch on this again in another question in a few moments, it has to be an intrinsic part of everything everyone's planning. If you're hiring an external person to code a new application for you, they're going to have to either build into that cybersecurity or access to external products to protect it. It's just going to have to be inherent in everything we do. This wave's a bit different though. All the previous technology waves have been driven by customer demand or the development of technologies. This has actually been driven by an external force. This is criminals that are driving the need for this, and this is why it's so relentless. And there's going to be no end to this. It's a constant game of cat and mouse. But there are lots of things organisations could do to create a platform around that and minimise their risk. And that's the phase I think we're entering into now. So that's kind of been the last 12 to 18 months. It's moved into the mass market and mainstream.
It's interesting you touched on the criminal side of it here being one of the driving forces behind this adoption, if you like. But I was reading an article the other day on ransomware as a service, and these companies are just, it's incredible. They're offering, even customer support for people that are purchasing these ransomware products, I guess, to extort companies, and they're just set up as a normal organization. It's
it's unlike anything we've ever seen before.
Yeah,
And
it's almost
which
if it wasn't so bad, you know.
Well, I suppose it's the modern equivalent of, one country invading another country 600 years ago to get their natural resources of forestry or good farming land. Now it's kind of the attack is on this sort of commercial front around data, because data is now the most valuable asset of a business. It doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
The data really is the core business. And I know when businesses are being acquired, the acquiring firms look at the value of the data they've got, how they manage it, how they use it, and how protected it is. So
data is a talking point for many conversations I've had the last couple of weeks. Actually, it's not just the, like you say, the protection of it, but I guess the need to protect it is becoming more evident, because we're now, if we're not being told that we need to protect that data, the other conversation is, what are you doing to visualize your data? And that involves obviously buying or investing in new products or tools to do that, which opens up, I guess, the threat landscape or the threat surface area. There's lots of different things that every new innovation seems to create a more of an opportunity for this hack or this
absolutely, yeah. And the faster we develop high-speed computing, it's a better tool than the current hackers have got. So we're equipping them with the tools they need to kind of cause us damage, if you like. So and this is why it's different. This isn't a created growth out of the industry and out of customer demand. Certainly it is, but the real driver is this element that we can't control. And is significant and is absolutely relentless, because there's a lot of money tied up. I mean, you just have to go. Well, I didn't bother for the sake of this pulling off lots of examples, because I think we all know them, but the numbers are quite staggering. Some of the research, just makes you sort of turn over in your sleep when you see the numbers that they're talking about of the people that are affected, but the cost of that effect.
Yeah, no, quite right. So tell me, given obviously what BIOS does in the history there, what is the role of managed services? So what is their place in cybersecurity?
So look, it's twofold, I think. What I'm hearing and seeing from my customers is a couple of things. There is a proliferation of tools. So any of us could go out and spend a fortune buying really sexy technical things that will stop cybersecurity threats. But it's a bit like plugging a dam. You plug up an email issue, and then you've got a firewall issue. Then you've got, a storage issue. Then you've got an end user issue, and it's just constant barrage coming. Yeah. So if I look across and generalize about the customers we deal with, the biggest issue is getting budget to buy stuff, and some of them are getting the budget from the more forward-thinking companies. Others have to cut back on other expenditure to fund it out of their current year's budget, in the hope that next year it'll be a line item in their P&L. So there's that side to it. But the biggest thing is having the resources to actually act on it. So even if you buy in the tools that you need, and a classic example, I've got a customer who's on an 18-month upgrade of their Oracle systems. It's all consuming for this business. Big retail organization, everything runs on it. It's a significant upgrade and change. Their entire IT team's focus is getting this delivered by a certain date. When they get alarms and alerts from the tools that they've bought about cybersecurity, what do they have to do? Make the choice. Does the project run late? Or do we run the risk of allowing this potential threat to permeate into the business? So that leaves leaders of the IT team two choices. And this is where companies like BIOSME and numerous others come into it, is they can either outsource existing IT activities to a managed service provider to free up resource to manage security, or fully outsource the security. So either way, one way or the other continues safe. The challenge is a resource. The tools are available and in place. IT people are very good at getting knowledgeable very quickly, but we've all got to do more with less. And there's no more intense place than that in the IT division. Constantly being, headcount freeze, headcount cut. Do more multitasking with skill sets across your team. And they're just running out of space and time to do it. So that's the biggest challenge I see it for organizations. And this is where cybersecurity as a service or other IT managed services will afford them space to have the resource to address cybersecurity issues.
And it's like when it comes to cybersecurity as a service or managed security services in general, you need the client to recognize this in the first stage, that this is actually a priority, if you like. But then I guess when budgets are tight or being restricted, often if you can do without it, and when I mean can do it, you don't need to financially, insurance is often one of the first things to kind of fall by the wayside. And this is essentially what we're talking about, right? Although there's no payout, there's no endowment on this kind of insurance, there's only a downside if you don't have it, right?
Absolutely. And one of the questions is, how do you measure the value and the return on investment? It's easy once there's an issue, because it's so painful and it's so deep and so hurtful to a business and to individuals. You know, some countries, the C-level are liable for customer data, other countries not so. But yeah, you're dead right. This is a hard thing. So I think there's sufficient publicity and press and knowledge now that it's an accepted part of life and what we do. One thing I've noticed, obviously we have a lot of conversations with technical people, but when I'm talking to business leaders, they always spoke about four things. They always spoke about acquiring new customers. They always spoke about protecting and growing their customer base. Cost maximization was always a topic, and so was trying to find efficiencies. But there's now a fifth topic, which is protecting their data. So I think there is a good enough awareness, and over the next few years, I think we will see, you know, some budget considerations for investing in an intangible return, which is this protection against cybersecurity.
When you mentioned the protection against cybersecurity, I had a conversation with the guys from HelpAG a couple of months ago, and we were talking about cyber insurance. And what we were discussing there was the challenge with cyber insurance is there's no what is being cyber secure. You get in the car, you put your seatbelt on, you've done your job effectively, right? But there's no seatbelt as far as cybersecurity is concerned, right? There's no baseline definition which implies that my insurance will pay out, for example. If I were to that as well,
this is why it's so hard for organisations to grab. And again, I think the role of the managed service provider fits in here nicely as well, because the sheer scale of this is massive. And you can have email issues, you can have firewall issues all over the place. So that means you've got to have a real breadth of tools. And logic just says, as a car manufacturer, you just can't buy all those things and run it, because you're running a manufacturing and distribution business. So that's where managed services come in. So as a medium and even an enterprise business, by using these outsourcers, you get access to a much wider range and a much broader scope than you could ever do internally. So that's really where some of the value comes in. And organizations, that accept that part of outsourcing with good reporting and a good joint accountability and joint responsibility things, that model works really well. And they're typically the more mature organizations. Others are getting there, but that's the challenge of the maturity of the market, I guess.
Yeah, quite right. So I guess it brings me on to the next question, which you've kind of answered to some extent, and that was just how do you anticipate things will change in the next kind of 12 to 18 months? Would it be fair to say, for example, if we just look at BIOS a second, because I know your company's evolved somewhat over the years, would it be fair to say that the BIOS has evolved from a system integrator to a managed service provider and potentially a managed security service provider in the future?
Absolutely. We own and operate our own cloud platform, so we are responsible for customers' data and therefore need to protect it. And to do that, Dominic, the founder of the business, very early on invested heavily and built a cybersecurity solution to provide that comfort, and built it in such a way that it's part of our private cloud when people come on into our managed services for cloud, or we can deliver it as a standalone solution to customers that have on-premise equipment or hyperscale cloud like AWS or Azure. But it's very much around delivering it as a service because of the resource constraints placed on people and the knowledge, that we work with customers who've got fantastic knowledge about end user and endpoint security, but aren't network specialists. So they struggle with understanding, the dynamic around security around their networking. And when they're an education institution, why would you expect them to have networking experts? So that's where it fits in. It's just adding the reach of their team through an outsourced provider. Pretty simple, but really effective.
Okay. So
there's a couple of other things. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. No, carry on.
I was just going to say the change over the next 18 months, I think there's probably three things that sort of float around my mind from what I'm saying. The pace and persistence is not going to go away. This is 24/7, 365. We've got a customer and we work with them and they look at their, threats geographically, and they have got zero activity out of this region. But they've got people from various countries at very odd times of the day and the night trying to access their resources for absolutely no reason. So it's constant. They're all in bed asleep thinking they've done a great job and they're getting attacked when some 15-year-olds woken up at 11 o'clock in the morning doing his thing. And it's this cat and mouse game that's going to carry on. But I think there's three things, and I think there's an acceptance of that, and people are accepting it and going to deal with it. They're going to get more sophisticated. As I said, we're giving them the tools to be more sophisticated, and they've got the financing to continue doing that. So that's going to continue. And we can't control that external threat. We've just got to manage it.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of supplier consolidation. It's a nightmare at the moment. If you go online and say, cybersecurity tools, there's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
It's very overwhelming. You're confused into inaction because, like I said, there's too much there.
Yep, and some of it's very niche, or it's very technical, or a lot of them overlap, but it's not obvious that they overlap, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, like we've seen in lots of other IT waves, there will be consolidation. So there'll be acquisitions, there'll be alliances, and you'll get bundled solutions and bundled products, which will be a lot more helpful and provide a broader scope. That would be good. But the big thing, I think, is the whole cybersecurity as a service. It just makes sense that you take this on board from experts that have got scale you can't get. And an example at BIOSME Middle East, we do a lot of automated resolution to cybersecurity threats because we've got hundreds of customers, and therefore we can get the economy of scale to enlist support from over 40 global security communities that share resources and share risks and threats and results and resolution. So, when we wake up in the morning and there's been an issue at night, someone in Australia has probably already made a fix, and we automate that into our thing. Companies can't do that. So there's a strong message here for taking on support from specialists.
Excellent. No,
they're the three things I think. It's relentless. There's going to be supplier consolidation, which will make decision making a bit easier, but ultimately, cybersecurity as a service is going to be the sort of growth part of the industry out of this. Okay,
perfect. So now, looking ahead to the next 5 to 10 years down the line, what does the cybersecurity industry look like? So, what I'm interested to understand, I guess, at an individual level, how do you ensure that your skill set remains relevant? Are there any certifications or exams? But also, I guess, more importantly, given what you do in your business, how relevant are certifications for commercial leaders?
That's a good question. I think commercial leaders need to understand the landscape. So they certainly don't need to understand all the solutions, but they need to understand where the threat is coming from and how one line of attack can integrate and embed itself into many, many others across the organization. So I think they need to firstly understand their own IT landscape probably better than they do. And I've got to say, most of the senior leaders we deal with now, IT is a topic high on their agenda anyway, and they've got a surprisingly good understanding of IT these days. But I do think they need to equip themselves with some very specific cybersecurity skills just to understand that landscape. What are the primary types of attacks, and how do they manifest themselves once they're inside our network and once they're inside our business? So it needn't be too cumbersome or too difficult, especially, as I said, if they're starting from a pretty decent position of understanding anyway. But I think it's a topic of, if they're having board meetings now, cybersecurity has to be a topic on that board meeting. So they all have to have some sort of knowledge. You see a lot of financial business, financial directors, chief financial officer, they kind of own a big chunk of the cybersecurity piece, and IT is actually the delivery arm, but it's owned by the CFO or the FD. So
that makes I think that makes total sense. I think that ultimately, like you said, it's cybersecurity to some extent is everybody's responsibility. And if you're making decisions about where your company should be spending money, you can't make that good decision unless you're acutely aware of the ramifications of not spending money, I guess, the opportunity cost or what have you. Yeah.
But I think there's also a more really fundamental consideration here. And if we could remove humans from the equation, we'd probably be fine, because this is where all the issues come from for one reason or another. So I think what organizations, and the organizations that are really winning at this, that are comfortable with it, that don't feel threatened and therefore are not getting distracted by it, have done some really simple things. So, they're clear about their policies. What do we mean by cybersecurity? How do we manage it? What is our business's position on this? They do invest in the tools, whether it be outsourced or in-house. So they've invested in the tools. But the big thing they do is they educate. Yeah. Because the weakest link is going to be a human being that's not vigilant or not aware. So they educate and they drive the compliance of that education really regularly. Very, very simple things. One of the things that scares me is when organizations take on new joiners, A, lots of companies still don't do proper induction training, but B, is it in the first morning's topic on the agenda list? Because by lunchtime, they're going to have a laptop set up, ready to go, and they can access all sorts of things. But have they got that understanding of their company's position on cybersecurity and what their role and responsibility is? Because it's very much a joint accountability. So like I said, I think as it's moving into the mass market, the prevention is about keeping it simple and scaling it. Because if your day-to-day use is healthy, that's going to make it harder. There's some fantastic tools that we don't even really need to know what they're doing, that will operate in the background, protecting a lot of things. But the biggest risk is around user behavior. And it's not only end users, it's customers, it's partners. And scarily, we see some appalling habits from IT people. So they may be doing a project, building a node of resources. So they set it up as password 123 to make it easy during that period. What do? They forget about it, and it goes live onto production with password 123. These sorts of things are happening. So this is also about building in discipline to audit your business, to keep on top of it. Like looking at real basic things. Active Directory. Are they making sure that people that left the business have had all their access rights cancelled? Why are there people that have got more than 30 days and they've not logged on? These are all indicators that there's security risk. So someone has to take the time to do that. So there's some really basic things that I think will have a huge impact. And I think that's the biggest challenge in the next sort of 2 to 5 years, is getting that right across the mass market.
I remember that one of the companies I used to work for, there was the problem I think they had from a security perspective was the inconsistency of the message internally. So for example, the tech guys would have their own equipment. Certain other people, other divisions would have, let's say, Lenovo laptops. Others, more senior people within the organization would be able to bring their own MacBooks. And there was this, when someone would question, well, why can't I bring my MacBook, or why can't I do X, Y, Z? The answer was always security. But then it didn't seem very consistent across the board. So because that was the answer, and because there was a perception this isn't consistent, it just wasn't believed. So therefore it was just kind of ignored. And I'm sure that probably led to issues along the way, and certainly frustrations. But I think it's important to get that messaging right internally. Otherwise you really, like you said, if the human error is the only error that's really gonna affect your business, then the way you communicate with other humans surely has to be a priority, right?
Absolutely, great point. Yeah, and some of the things we see from the people doing well at this is they do communicate regularly, and some have got monthly quizzes and tests they put in place just to keep everyone refreshed and up to date. Simple little things, but like you said, it keeps it clear and consistent and keeps it in front of them. And and this goes back to who owns. Is it an IT issue or an IT delivery arm, and is this a different sort of issue for somewhere else in the business, and how are they interfacing with internal communications?
Quite right.
So when it gets to, like I say, when it gets to this mass market, it's about scaling it and keeping it simple, so that people really understand what their responsibility is.
The question actually from Hans. Hans has asked, do you think BYOD or bring your own device will be banned in the mid to long term?
That's a really interesting question and very relevant. The options are available now, Hans, where you can lock it down in terms of what they can access. So I think the industry's done really, really well in acknowledging that bring your own device is very relevant. And there are a number of tools around that. And we see this a lot in schools where, you've literally got hundreds of students with hundreds of different devices. But the schools can lock down the content and the applications and the access they can have. So if companies are prepared to allow bring your own devices, they have to invest in some really well structured and pretty industry accepted tools to manage that. So the option is there to definitely continue doing it. And then there's real cost benefits to doing it. There's real working flexibility benefits to do it, provided you want to manage that risk in accordance to that. And if you don't want to manage the risk, then lock it all down. And like you said, Richard, everyone has a Lenovo, one or two different models, and your login procedures are very rigid and very clear to everyone.
Exactly. But maybe even bring your own device should be upgraded to use your own device anyway, because if people aren't bringing it to work, they're using it at home.
True, absolutely. And that's been a whole heap of joy in the last couple of years.
Okay, so as an organization in cybersecurity, what do you believe are the key factors in attracting great talent? So if we take a look, we've obviously discussed how we deal with the talent that we haven't bought, how we manage that, but how do you attract great talent to an organization such as BIOSME?
So at this current phase of where we're at in this wave, it's still about supply and demand. Maybe different in some of the mature markets like Australia and the UK, but here in the Middle East, it's a challenge to get the right talent. So there's two or three things. Short term, you've got to pay because they'll move, because they're in high demand. And that'll even out over time. And we've seen this, in numerous other sort of evolutions and stages of the industry. So I think that you've got to accept that you may have to pay a little bit more than you're used to paying for your service people and your DevOps and what have you. I think you need to make sure to attract good talent that you're going to provide them with the tools to do their job, because these are from what we see, these are really committed guys. And it's almost a lifestyle for them as much as it is, it's a real vocation, and they want to be good at what they're doing and they want to be at the forefront of it. So they're going to want access to good tools to be able to do it. And I think it's important for organisations not to underestimate the importance of continuing professional development and not just dump it on them. What we see with a lot of engineers is, they love it, they'll do it at night, they'll do it in the weekend. That's a very finite, short-sighted way. I think organisations have to really build in continuous professional development during the working week for these people and have a program. When it's not done, they will move, because they'll do all those things. They'll work for less money, they won't have great tools, and they'll do all their own research, but they're just making themselves very valuable to someone else, so they'll leave. And I think the fourth element to this is making them a centre of knowledge, but letting them take ownership for knowledge transfer across the business. So they can continue working on really high value, complex things while they educate their colleagues and peers how to manage what's becoming more transactional sort of cybersecurity threats. And that gives them an additional dimension to the job. So that's the kind of stuff that we're seeing happening.
I think the piece you mentioned about personal professional development is critical to any organization, right? Irrespective of what fields you work in, if you're not providing that career path or the opportunity to grow and develop as an individual, people will just leave you. I mean, we talk to candidates obviously all the time in the market, and money is not the number one motivator for wanting to move. Growth is the number one motivator for move, and we see that quite often, and we've seen that more I guess over the last 6 months, because I think as some companies obviously downsize, perhaps change strategy, there's a perception from a lot of candidates that we've engaged with that there's just no longer the growth opportunity within the organization, and therefore they're open to exploring new things, but it's interesting that, like I said, money is never the number one driver. Obviously money is an indication that you are progressing, of course, but growth, progress is the number one driver.
And there's a big expectation on these guys. So they do work long hours. They do get interrupted at horrible times. So when do we expect them to do their, ongoing development? If they've got a family life or activities they want to do, so we do demand and expect a lot of them. And I think that fits into an organization that values them and has a vision for them and will deliver this growth that they need.
Yeah. So what do you think are the most, or I guess the toughest things to recruit for within cybersecurity, be it skills, experience, or certain tools exposure?
So I thought long and hard about this because it's quite an interesting topic, and I think a lot of it looks after itself, because there is the whole technical element, and you've got to get the right technical people in, and we've even had examples of people fraudulently claiming that they've got certain qualifications and understandings, and there's companies like Dataflow that can test all of this stuff, particularly in a region like ours where exams may be achieved in other countries to validate that. So there is the whole technical side of things, and that's especially, but what I'm seeing that adds real value to these roles and is very, very hard to identify and get is a balance of that technical knowledge and the commercial understanding.
Yeah.
So when we're engaged in forums with our customers, and we do this every month, and we review all the security incidents in a month, it makes a huge difference when the technical lead can communicate commercially. And has the confidence and the comfort to do that. When you've got a very, very good technical specialist, it puts a lot of pressure on other people to lead the conversation and drag out the things that you need. So one of the things I think that is very, very hard to find is that balance. A technical person that's a really good communicator and understands the commercial implications of what they're doing. Yeah,
it's interesting. So we get mandated quite a lot to find techno-commercial consultants, right? And more often than not, and again, this isn't a blanket statement, but more often than not, we find that a techno-commercial consultant will have started in let's say a sales career rather than a technical career. So so it's more likely to be a salesperson that's had a real interest in the technical side, and then they've gone out and got certifications to understand and help them sell, rather than the technical guys that have, let's say, invested in soft skills in order to better communicate. And I think perhaps the reason that is because it's more, I guess it's more of an obvious skill to pay for to some extent. You cybersecurity, you get a cybersecurity certification that's well recognized, so you could pursue that. But from a technical guy who wants to learn how to speak articulately or communicate in sales, there's not as many. Obviously, there's plenty of different sales training. I mean, I've been in sales all my life, but the reality is there's nothing as what's the word, that's given the same level of credibility. Does that make sense?
And look, it really is. And as I said, a lot of these guys can get some great technical qualifications and experience, but the pressure we're seeing from the businesses is that a big part of all of the cybersecurity management is the audit trails, the compliance, and the reporting. So it puts pressure on the IT teams and the businesses when they have to spend a lot of time dragging information out of technical people to put into a report that's going to the board of directors or an auditor. So if you've got these technical guys that, like you said, have actually invested in a slightly different set of skills or have come from a different set of skills, it actually relaxes the burden on the IT team or the wider business, because they're more efficient in doing what is a very important element. If you're a publicly listed company and you've had a cybersecurity breach and you can't demonstrate through good reporting what you've been doing, it kind of exasperates the whole problem. So we don't underestimate the importance of regular, clear and concise reports, and you need good people to feed into that. Likewise, when there is the request for investment or potential threats or change, and you need the technical people to speak to the C-level, they need to be able to do it in a way that everyone understands, and that's very threatening for a lot of technical people. So for me, what I'm seeing from our customers, that's what their challenges. They're upskilling some of their existing technical people with technical, but they know they're not the guys that are going to lead from the front with this, and finding someone that's got that nice balance is what they're struggling with at the moment.
Yeah, well, I can definitely see that. So on a personal level, Rudi, so what do you do to keep on top of your personal development in such a rapidly evolving space?
I do a couple of things really, quite informally. There's some great apps and great news feeds, and so I just scan those to find something of interest and then have a look at it. And I don't use it as a single source of truth. I use it, well, what sort of questions should I be asking myself and other people around us to keep topical? Some of the things I see about the research is just as wonky as anything, and they're almost making up numbers sometimes, I think. I saw one today, they said, 6 out of 10 companies have had a malware payment they've had to make. I'm not hearing or seeing that. And I see more than 10 companies a week. Anyway, so very quickly I scan, things like CSO updates, which is a daily update, or Computer World update, and it's just stuff, and it triggers things in your mind. But then at a little bit more structured, I still spend quite a lot of time on LinkedIn looking at things people are sharing. And I think LinkedIn's not what it used to be, but there's still a lot of very, very good content that you can access on LinkedIn. And again, ask yourself the question, is it actually accurate and true? And is it a direction I should be thinking about? And then every quarter or every 6 months, I make a concerted effort to look at Forrester or Gartner, or Cisco or Microsoft, and what have they produced in a sort of more significant kind of a way to keep up with what's topical.
Definitely. Okay. Thanks very much for that. If you can, when we get to posting the webinar on LinkedIn, maybe if you can add in the comments there, just a couple of the sources that you use for monitoring, that would be really useful. Thanks, Rudi. Okay, so where do you think, back to BIOS for a second, so where do you think BIOS will be in the next 5 years as a company evolves?
So BIOS is in a great place. Less than 20% of the market in the GCC has adopted cloud. So just that pure organic growth within that is going to be significant. And BIOSME is evolving from being a mid-sized business, predominantly selling the high end of mid-size, predominantly working with the higher end of mid-sized companies, into enterprise now. And it got some significant case studies with some really big businesses. So the platform they've built is very, very relevant for today in a high growth market. So they've still got loads of leg room to go there. And the emergence of the hyperscalers just grows the market. So wherever Amazon and Google and AWS turn up, the market actually grows. So even though there's more competition, there's more to go after. So the other thing I see for BIOSME is our primary proposition is infrastructure as a service, fully managed, which beautifully aligns it to cybersecurity and data lifecycle management and quite a few additional things. And one of the areas that we're progressing into at the moment is endpoint protection for end users. Because while we're protecting the compute resource, the networking and the data, end users are at risk, that put us at risk. So as a business, we've extended and pivoted into that a bit to make sure our customers' end users are in a much more healthy state, which ultimately protects what we're doing.
Excellent. Good.
Very aligned, very close, and quite easy to access for us. So there's lots of options to continue the growth.
Interesting. Very bright, at least for people who are working in the industry, right? Obviously not bright for people who are being attacked, but bright for people who are being attacked.
It's a bit of a two-edged sword, but
So look, final question for today's session, Rudi. Do you have any advice there for anyone who may be considering either starting a career in cybersecurity or even transitioning into cybersecurity, given where obviously the market's going, as you just defined?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, because I'm not a technical guy, it's about balance. Yeah. And I would say maybe not equal amounts of time, but understand that for everything that you learn technically, there's got to be a business driver and a business reason behind it. So understand both elements, and that'll stand you in really good stead. But it is underpinned by good technical knowledge, and you know, I've got some of that over 20 years, but you could condense that in a specialist area. The other thing I would say is not be too niche. Yeah. Just because of the pace of change and the way things are moving. So maybe not be a total generalist, but broaden it out and always attach to a commercial element and a good commercial understanding. Yeah. But great field to get yourself involved in, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that's why we've certainly aligned ourselves with the industry. So cybersecurity and data and AI specifically, because these are, you know, growth markets. And I think for the reasons you've identified during this session, they'll continue to grow at a rate of knots over the next 5 years, I'd say. So it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, listen, it's phenomenal. Yes.
Rudi, thank you very much for joining us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. So thank you for everyone else who's joined the session as well. Rudi, do you want to say thanks also?
Look, I've enjoyed it. It's a really interesting thing I'm quite passionate about, because this does make a difference to businesses and all sorts going on. So thanks for taking the time out to take on board some of these things. And I hope you find some use for some of the insights. But Richard, thanks for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Rudi. Guys, listen, I hope you've all enjoyed listening. A recording of this session we posted on the Alcomatics website. That's alcomatics.com/webinars. And our company page on LinkedIn in the next couple of days. So please like and follow for updates. We'll be back again next month with another CyberSEC leader. If you'd like to join as a guest on a future session, please email me directly. My email is simple. It's just richard@alcomatics.com. But also if your company needs help sourcing top cybersecurity talent, then please reach out to me directly at richard@alcomatics.com. My team and I'll be happy to support you guys. So take care, and I will see you all next month. Thanks again. Thanks, Rudi.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.